Recognized for 5 minutes.
I was wondering if it might be helpful and constructive if the gentleman from Michigan could yield to a question and elaborate if he is in fact open to the kinds of reforms that the gentleman from New Mexico has discussed, and in general, do you in any way see the language of your proposed amendment mitigating against that kind of constructive conversation going forward?
Thank you to the gentleman. In fact, going back to my somewhat facetious comment about the term full, full was intended to get at the notion that a full reauthorization deals with all of the questions that have come. And I thank gentleman, Mr. Pierce, for his work last year and this year. And I think you understand that if the language as it was first drafted was such that you found some objection and helped to in fact soften that language, that you might understand some of the sensitivity that we have. These issues are important, and in this particular case, I do think it's important to note that while in the aggregate, if you look at the program, there was a significant number of unexpended funds, some of which are clearly attributable to the situation that I described earlier in terms of grant recipients attempting to assemble grant dollars that are large enough to do a project at scale. But it is also important to note that there has been a significant improvement in the expenditure level without any change at this point in time in the program, but just with the provision of technical assistance through HUD. But I welcome your offer to work on reauthorization. It's not my time; it's Mr. Heck's time. But I yield back to
gentleman, yield over here.
It's the time belongs to the gentleman from Washington. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Sure.
Can I just throw out a suggestion to both sides here? Because as someone looking at this from a distance, it sounds like you're saying on pretty much the same page that the problem seems to be that you are trying to delete language in here that we think should be in here, but we're saying that what you're putting in here is generally on the same page. If you just remove the strike clause, so that we keep the language that's currently in the legislation and appropriately add this language that you're putting in here, the last sentence and those words notwithstanding, would that be amenable to all parties?
And
no, then I would.
Could I
never mind.
ask the gentleman from Washington to yield?
It would not be amenable to either one of us.
Never mind.
Will
The gentleman from New Jersey never minds. The time belongs to the gentleman from Washington.
Will the gentleman yield?
Sure again.
Okay, thanks. Well, I mean, this is the third time you get to yield. I mean, so the gentleman from Michigan is pointing out that what we want to do is not withhold funds from somebody who has a legitimate reason, and that's the precise language that we added. If you look at line 22, it says that we're going to agree with the President except if there is no legitimate reason to strategically hold its allocation. In other words, this is exactly the circumstance that we anticipated and I think that you're concerned about. But then additionally, we got the concession of the ombudsman at the HUD for the grantees affected. And so these two things are in there specifically to address concerns because we have the same concerns. And we think that we have dealt with this in the language, and then the reauthorization begins then to deal with some of the deeper problems. And again, I would urge you to take a look at that and would love to have your co-sponsorship on that. But so much of what you're anticipating and wondering about and even worrying about is actually, it appears to me to be already addressed in the views. And so again, I would draw your attention to line 22 and 23 there to be the ones that to me already had addressed the concerns that you're bringing up. And I would yield back to the gentleman from Washington and thank him for yielding.
Would the gentleman yield briefly?
Why not?
Sure. Thank you. I appreciate the comment. The issue that I had with the existing language is that I think for maybe those who are more intimately involved in the program, it reads as if the problems of unexpended funds is a far more pervasive problem than what the facts on the ground really would indicate. In particular, and I think, I can't remember, one of you on the other side pointed out that there was a single grantee, a substantial single grantee that constituted a great percentage of the unexpended funds. I felt like that was not fully discernible to a reader, and that's the reason I offered the language. I understand it might not pass, but I hope this contributes to the work that we'll do on reauthorization as we move ahead.
The time of the gentleman from Washington that he has been so generous to dispense with has now been dispensed with. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Number one, I appreciate the gentleman from Michigan, his concern. I've listened very carefully to what he has to say. As a matter of process, again, this is the first time I'm seeing this amendment. I think it's the first time many on this, perhaps everybody on this side of the aisle, is seeing the amendment. Certainly, if there's an opportunity for bipartisan language to be worked out, as has been done in many other cases today, I would just encourage all members on the minority side to reach out to us early. A lot of this language I think would be satisfactory to the chair. Other parts of the language is problematic. The bottom line is we spent some time crafting the language we have in the budget views and estimates. We're fairly happy with it. Again, every member has the right to bring their amendment to the markup and offer it only at that time. But if you really want to have a higher percentage chance of it being incorporated into the final product, and it's your option, the sooner that the majority gets a chance to see it, to see if we can negotiate in good faith. So that's my comment on process. I really also want to thank the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Pierce, who's been a real leader, the leader on our side of the aisle on this issue. And I've learned a great deal from him on this. We all look to his expertise on these issues. He spent a lot of time dealing with the Native American tribes in his district, in his state, and brings a lot of passion and expertise to the issue. And we worked with him very carefully on this language, as we will continue to do so. The last thing I would say, and it's not really directed at the gentleman from Michigan, but I do want to say that as we craft this language, a concern that I have with respect to a lot of these programs, I do not believe ultimately the compassion of a society is measured by how many taxpayer-financed programs a Congress can authorize. I don't think the compassion of society is measured by the number of dollars that constitute inputs into a program. What we ought to be looking at is measuring the quality of the lives changed. What the outputs of the program? How have we empowered low-income individuals who have challenges, who have needs, who have their own hopes and aspirations? What have we done to improve the dignity of their lives? And if we truly have compassion for them, what is it that we are doing to make them independent and self-sufficient? How have we helped them in that regard? So I'm not indifferent as to the number of programs we have or the number of dollars that are input, but what an incredibly poor measure ultimately. I'm not sure more money has been thrown at a problem than the war on poverty, and we know that 50 years later, after LBJ's pronouncement, we have the same number of people living at the poverty line. So the great tragedy there, although it's a tragedy for the taxpayer that so much of the money was squandered, the real tragedy is how many lives were not changed. And it's just an important perspective that I wanted to add to the debate. The chair yields back the balance of his time. Anybody else seek recognition? If not, the question is on agreeing to the amendment. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. Nay. In the opinion of the chair, the nays appear to have it. The nays have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Gentleman from Michigan, a recorded vote has been requested. Those in favor of a recorded vote will raise their hand and be counted. A little better number than last time. I see the gentleman from Connecticut hasn't quite cooperated with his colleagues. There he is. He has now a sufficient number having raised their hands. A recorded vote is ordered pursuant to subsection C5 of Rule 3 of the committee rules. The vote on this question is postponed. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Washington, for what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
I have an amendment on the desk, Mr. Chair.
We will pause a moment and have the amendment distributed. The clerk will report.
Amendment offered by Mr. Heck. On page 15, at the end of line 2, insert the following. The Bureau has a dedicated office to protect military men and women. The committee commends the Bureau on its Office of Servicemember Affairs for fast and effective work identifying abuses of military members and their families and in legal action and education to protect those Americans who protect this country.
The gentleman from Washington is recognized for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. And here's hoping I can break my string here by offering this very, very simple, straightforward two-sentence amendment to the section relating to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, calling out and commending the Office of Servicemember Affairs for the work they have done. Between the months of July 2011 and February of this year, that office received and processed a good number of more than 14,000 complaints. Just last week, they announced the recovery of $1 million on behalf of active duty service members for issues ranging from mortgages to credit cards to payday loans and the like. It's possible that people would assign a motive to me in offering this amendment that's only partially true, namely that I do have the privilege to represent Joint Base Lewis-McChord, the largest joint operating base in the United States. But frankly, that's not the largest reason. The largest reason is quite personal. And somewhat uncomfortably, I share this story with you today. When I was 15 years old, I stood in my living room with my mother and my father and my older brother. My father was a good, stoic German American. And if I got good night out of him at the end of the day, that would be a fairly verbal day for him. He didn't express himself very often and never emotions. But as we stood in that living room that day, my older brother was in full dress Marine uniform, leaving to go to war. And for the very first time in my life, I saw my father cry. Frankly, I didn't know he was capable of crying. I really didn't. And I didn't fully appreciate at that moment in time the seriousness of the moment. Unfortunately, in the fullness of time, I would. But it has always served to be an unbelievably powerful reminder to me what an unlimited sacred obligation we have to support those who are serving in uniform and on our behalf. The very last thing in the world any active duty service member ever needs to worry about is a complication of an issue for which there is nowhere to turn to get help. Holly Petraeus and the Office of Servicemember Affairs are doing a good job. They're doing a good job by the numbers, as documented, and I dare say every single member of this committee has probably had an experience where one or more of their constituents has been assisted by them. So, our budget view and estimates, again, contain a whole range of observations, some pretty critical, and some of those, I think, somewhat fairly. But I think just as fairly, we ought to call out those who are doing this work on behalf of service members. 2 sentences. Says good job. Says keep it up. I ask you to please join me in support of this amendment. I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does gentleman from Wisconsin seek time?
To move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
You know, as I look to the men and women who serve in the military and fight every day for the freedoms that all of us share in this country, I think one concept that they understand is accountability. They're accountable to their superiors. And the agency that we're talking about today, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, doesn't know any accountability. And that's been one of our concerns on this committee. Accountability that would come through this institution, an institution that is responsive to the American people. And when you don't get funding from Congress and you get it from the Federal Reserve, you're not accountable. When you don't have a bipartisan commission running a powerful agency like this, but one director, you're centralizing power, again, that's unaccountable. And if you look at the salaries that the military men and women in this country make, those who are on the front line fighting for our very freedoms, I think they would be outraged that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau actually gets to set their own pay. I think if you asked the military men and women who serve if they could set their own pay, they would love to do that, because I'm sure they'd probably set pay scales kind of like the CFPB. And I think we've talked about these numbers quite a bit, but just to go over them again, I mean, there are 6 CFPB officers that earn more than the presidential cabinet secretaries at $199,000. There's 173 CFPB members that make more than elected members of Congress, 209 members of employees of the CFPB that make more than the governors. There's 37 CFPB employees that make more than Supreme Court justices. I mean, these are pretty heavy salaries. You also look at men who serve on the front line, putting their lives in danger, and what they make, and then you also look at the associate director of the chief operating officer at the CFPB makes $240,000 a year. The chief human capital officer, $225,000. An IT specialist at $216,000. You have an agency that's out of control that sets their own wages. The deputy assistant director for research, so not even the director, not even the assistant, the deputy assistant director of research makes $195,000, also more than even members of Congress. So I think we would serve our men and women well if this institution worked aggressively to have every agency in government accountable. I think they fight for the very freedom and liberty that we enjoy, and that freedom and liberty is embodied in our Constitution. And if we don't have a review of these agencies, I think we're doing a disservice to the founders who wrote that document by which we're supposed to govern. And so I'm grateful for the men and women who serve, but also think that we serve them also very well when we hold agencies accountable like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And so with that, I have some, I'm not concerned about the underlying premise of saying we want to protect the military men and women for, in regard to financial issues. But I would be a lot happier if my friends across the aisle would join us and say there's room for reform on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, It wasn't written perfectly. It hasn't been implemented perfectly. There's a lot of room for reform. And so I guess I haven't seen a lot of willingness and bipartisanship saying, let's work together to make it accountable to all of us, members of Congress. We have some differing opinions about how this agency is working, but I also think if the American people have faith in this institution, I think we can work together to make sure that the CFPB can do its job and still remain accountable to the American people. With that, I yield back.
Well, the chair wasn't watching, so either one, the gentleman yielded back or his time has expired. The chair is going to recognize himself for 5 minutes. Number one, I just want to, again, I know there's a lot that members have to do. I will continue to encourage members who would like to see their work product actually incorporated into the final product that is furthered to the House to reach out as early as possible. I realize this is only a 2-sentence amendment, but it is an amendment we are seeing for the first time. Although we have had a number of hearings on CFPB, I do not have my fingertips the record, nor have I studied it on what they have accomplished here. I want to again salute the gentleman from Washington. He is known to be a real advocate on behalf of both veterans and our service members. But I simply do not am not prepared to accept the language as was originally constructed. I wish to inform the members that the gentleman from Washington and I have had a sidebar conversation. So I'd like to offer for unanimous consent a change, an amendment to his language. It's fairly simple. I will read slowly for the clerks. The new amendment would read, quote, "The Bureau has a dedicated office to protect military men and women, period. The committee commends the Bureau and its Office of Service Member Affairs to the extent it has quickly and effectively identified concerns and complaints of military members and their families, and engaged in legal action and education to protect those Americans who protect this country," unquote. Without objection, this will now become the base text. Do I need to reread for the clerks, or might we have that? Again, I would just like to commend the gentleman from Washington, encourage all members. Again, you can get the vote, you can get the language in the actual end product. The latter will be vastly improved the sooner you reach out to the chair and our staff. But as the grandson, son, and brother of military veterans who served respectfully in World War II, Korea, and the Cold War, although I did not serve my country in uniform, I could not have greater respect for those who do, and know that both my 10-year-old son, who is not here today, and my 12-year-old temporary intern live in a freer, more secure, safer America because of their efforts. And so any and all attention paid by this committee to both our military veterans and our active duty personnel is something to be welcomed. With that, the chair yields back. Does anyone else seek recognition? If not, the question is on agreeing to the amendment as amended by unanimous consent. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does the gentleman from Connecticut seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
We'll pause for a moment and have the amendment distributed. The clerk will report.
Amendment offered by Mr. Himes. On page 14, line 19, strike all and insert the following. Reauthorization of the Terrorism Risk Insurance
Chairman, unanimous
Act.
consent to dispense with the reading of the amendment.
Without objection. Member is recognized for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, let me start by saying that I'm pleased that the majority's proposed views includes a section on terrorism risk insurance, an insurance program that is very, very important to many of us with urban areas and other high-risk areas in our or near our districts. A close reading of that proposed language, of course, shows that the action items are words like the committee agreeing with the administration and taking the administration at its word. While I am pleased that the section is in there, what is missing is any sense of urgency or commitment to actually moving forward in reauthorizing terrorism risk insurance, which, as the committee will know, expires on December 31st, 2014, at the very end of this year. I hear lots of talk about the economic effects of regulatory-generated uncertainty. Of course, there is a great deal of uncertainty created by things like a failure to reauthorize the Ex-Im Bank, which is a key competitive thing, as we've discussed in a previous amendment, a failure to reconstruct the GSEs, flood insurance, and of course, the uncertainty that arises with the possibility that this very important insurance program would expire in December. I'd also like to acknowledge, I think, the argument the Chairman would make that these insurance programs have to be crafted well, such that we're not inadvertently or permanently subsidizing something which we wouldn't choose to subsidize otherwise. We've had very close and personal experience with the need for terrorism risk insurance. When it was created in 2002, it was in response, of course, to the horrendous events of September 11th, 2001. At that point, most commercial lenders stopped offering terrorism risk insurance, having a dramatic adverse effect on the ability of commercial and other real estate construction in areas that were perceived as high risk. The effect of this unavailability is stalled development, policyholder default, and a suffering economy. The Real Estate Roundtable concluded that in the 14 months between 9/11 and the enactment of TRIA, over $15 billion in real estate transactions were stalled or canceled because of the lack of this terrorism risk coverage. Worse yet, that translates into thousands of jobs lost as well. The White House Council of Economic Advisors found that there was an immediate and direct loss of 300,000 jobs associated with this deferred construction. Enactment of TRIA helped to reinvigorate that industry and spurred billions of dollars of new construction and thousands of construction jobs. Our experience with TRIA shows that without a backstop in place, terrorism coverage becomes unavailable, and that slows development. Now, again, acknowledging that these programs must be carefully calibrated, this particular insurance program has a couple of characteristics that I think, even to those more libertarian-minded members, should be meaningful. First, when it comes to terrorism, unlike other things, the government, the federal government in particular, has far more information than the private sector does, by definition, and is therefore in a position to be a player in that risk market. Secondly, the federal government, in the event of a terrorist attack, a catastrophic one, it will be there anyway. We have seen that in Sandy, we saw that in Katrina, we saw that on 9/11. We will be there anyway. So if we're going to be there, should we not do it via a well-calibrated insurance program that over time protects taxpayer monies but provides an insurance that the private market is not prepared to do? I would also note that under TRIA, taxpayer dollars are protected because they can be recouped in a post-tax surcharge. So, Mr. Chairman, I understand this is a complicated issue, but the amendment I have offered would simply provide more certainty that we would move forward on TRIA. If you read the language carefully, it does not call for a permanent, but merely a long-term extension, again, in the hope of providing some certainty, or at least erasing some uncertainty, but makes clear this Congress's commitment for us to move forward quickly on the reauthorization of a program that is very important to an awful lot of economic activity in and around my district and throughout that country. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the gentleman's interest in this terrorist TRIA Act. You know, one of the things I want to point out to the gentleman is we've actually had 2 hearings on TRIA, and so it's not something that this committee doesn't recognize has a responsibility to doing. You know, the gentleman talks about what happened in 2002, and obviously the decision was made to put in place a temporary backstop to get the industry back up on and running again. As Ronald Reagan says, the closest thing to eternal life in Washington, D.C. is a temporary government program. And here we are over 10 years later, 12 years later, I guess, you know, we still have a TRIA in place. But what has happened is the markets have stabilized since that time. Risk modeling has advanced. Underwriting has become more nuanced. In fact, the price of this coverage has dropped 70%. Now, one of the reasons it's dropped that much is that the industry, the insurance industry, is quite honestly is getting some free reinsurance, and where the taxpayers are picking up potential liability and not being compensated for that. I think the thing that I would say to the gentleman is we're going to move forward with this issue, but one of the things that I am not overly interested in doing is extending the policy as it currently exists today. I think there are ways that we can put things in place that would protect the taxpayers and move the federal government out of the insurance business, because as you know, we look around at the various insurance programs that the federal government send, and one of those is the flood insurance program. That's a program that's $24 billion in the hold. We look at the FHA. FHA is undercapitalized. They haven't met their minimum capital requirements in a number of years now. And so the list goes on. And, you know, people talk about, well, you know, there's very little risk here. We haven't had any claims. But we were told a number of years ago there was very little risk if the taxpayers would ever have to intervene with Freddie and Fannie. And nearly $200 billion later, the taxpayers did have to intervene. So I think this is obviously an issue that we incorporated into our document. It's something we intend to address. But, you know, I have to disagree with the gentleman that our goal here is to quickly and cleanly, I'm not sure what cleanly means, and for the long term, I think depends on what kinds of reforms that we were able to incorporate into this legislation. So while I appreciate the gentleman's interest, and I look forward to working with him as we move forward on this issue, and would welcome his ideas and thoughts on that, I have to respectfully reject his amendment. I yield back.
Would the gentleman yield to the chair?
I would yield to the chair.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I would concur with the gentleman's assessment. I guess I don't know why I continue to repeat myself, but first time we've seen the amendment. Members obviously have the right to either get the vote or if they want to have their language included. For the third or fourth time, I would encourage members to share the language early with the majority side. Again, it is purely the choice of the member who offers the amendment. I do notice the language, unless Congress takes quote-unquote immediate action. I believe of the 2 reauthorizations of TRIA, one took place, our committee worked its will in July before December expiration, and I believe under Chairman Frank, the first reauthorization. The committee did not work its will until November, before the December expiration of the program. As chair of this committee, it is my intention, not my promise, but my intention to work our will far sooner than that. As the chairman of the Housing and Insurance Committee has stated, we've already had a couple of hearings on the subject. I would, in all probability, anticipate at least one, perhaps more hearings on the subject. Is looking at the gentleman's language, and I appreciate his concern on the issue. I have no doubt it is important to him and his constituents. I'm not sure I agree with all of the factual assertions that I see within this particular amendment. I do not know if TRIA is not reauthorized, that terrorism insurance will be unavailable. It is not 2001 or 2002. We are many years removed from that tragic event. I also agree with the chairman of the Housing and Insurance Subcommittee. I don't know if the term cleanly means without reform, without amendment. I did pay a little bit of attention to the President's recent budget submission on page 1041 with respect to TRIA. The budget submission reads, quote, "The administration will work with Congress to identify appropriate adjustments to program terms to achieve budget neutrality and, over the longer term, full transition of the program to the private sector." Those are not the words of myself. Those are the words from the Obama administration. And the time of the gentleman from Texas, I notice, is way expired. Who seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from New York, for what purposes gentlemen seek recognition?
Move to strike last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to support the gentleman from Connecticut's amendment. One thing that we do know, we have TRIA today because of a great tragedy that took place in our country. And one of the things that I first wanted to dispel, that TRIA is just for a certain region in our nation. TRIA insurance is important for every piece of our nation. When you think about what's happening and why TRIA is important with terrorism insurance, you can think about any place in our country where there's a shopping mall that wants to be developed, or office complexes, or factories, or hotels, a stadium, utilities, airports, port facilities. This could be any place in America. And this kind of construction is being put on hold, or will be put on hold, if we don't reauthorize TRIA. Fact of the matter is, many insurance companies are not offering or reauthorizing insurance now because they don't know whether TRIA will be again passed and allowed and reenacted. So, first of all, I think that as members of Congress, we've got to look at not just New York, not just Connecticut, but we're looking at the entire nation and its importance. Now, the gentleman from Texas indicated that he didn't know. Well, let me just say, in a Fitch rating study in July 2013, they said it is unlikely that substantial private market capacity would arise as a substitute to TRIA coverage if the program is allowed to expire. The Bloomberg government analysis says there is no reason to assume that reinsurers will re-enter the market if the TRIA program expires, and every reason to assume that the availability of coverage will fall. Current private reinsurance capacity, every business that I've talked to going around does not meet the full demands of direct insurers to cover their current retentions under TRIA, which directly, I believe, contradicts the notion that TRIA is somehow crowding out the private market. The gentleman from Connecticut, I think, correctly stated, right after 9/11, when we talked about the hit that it took to our economy, because due to the deferred construction investments, there was a direct loss of over 300,000 jobs during the 14 months between 9/11 and TRIA's enactment. It could almost be argued that, you could almost see where when TRIA was enacted, that our economy, especially commercial real estate, started to move again. So it shows the direct impact by passing TRIA when we did had on our overall economy and the growth and development of our country. So I can conclude with this, because there's another source. Marsh and McLennan's 2013 Terrorism Risk Insurance Report said, coupled with limited availability of standalone reinsurance capacity and continued perceived limitations on the reliability of terrorism risk models, the insurance markets are not well positioned, I repeat, not well positioned to be a viable alternative replacement to TRIA. So the importance of this amendment and us addressing this and addressing it immediately is as important as our economy is in America. It is for every city in America, whether you come from a big city or a small city, the North or the South, the East or the West. You know, it is for the communities in which we live. You know, we never thought, and we surely wish, I know I wish, that we wouldn't have to have this debate. But after 9/11, everyone, and we've got to make sure that we are concerned about it and we're prepared and that we allow the economy to continue to grow. And so I strongly support the gentleman from Connecticut's amendment on TRIA amendment, the TRIA initiative. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Anybody else seeking recognition? If not, the question is on agreeing to the amendment. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. Nay in the opinion of the chair. The nays appear to have it. The nays have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Who seeks recognition?
Roll call vote.
A recorded vote has been requested. Those in favor of a recorded vote will raise their hand and be counted.
You see everybody over here? I got his hand.
It's 1/5. It's 1/5.
Is the author of the amendment not available? He doesn't need it. I checked. Okay. A recorded vote, sufficient number having raised their hands, recorded vote is ordered. Pursuant to subsection C5 of Rule 3 of the committee rules, the vote on this question is postponed. I wish to notify members that votes on the floor are pending, perhaps as early as a few amendments. I have been informed there is one more amendment to be offered. Happy to debate it as long as the member wishes, but if he doesn't want to come back after floor votes, he may want to be judicious with his debate. So, for what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
We will pause an exceedingly brief moment to allow the amendment to be distributed. Perhaps a longer moment. The clerk will report.
Amendment offered by Mr. Meeks, beginning on page 13, line 42, strike all and insert the following. The committee also notes that on March 4th, 2014, the U.S. House of Representatives passed under suspension of the rules H.R. 3370, the Homeowners Flood Insurance Affordability Act of 2014 by a vote of 306 to 91. This legislation is critical addressing affordability issues facing thousands of homeowners across our country. Due to FEMA's improper implementation of the Bigger Waters Act, families were suffering from unintended consequences.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm delighted. And this is an amendment that I think that we can agree upon, or we should be able to agree upon. I was extremely proud of the bipartisan vote that we had on the floor of the House on March 4th of the 2014, where Democrats and Republicans came together to say that we are going to make sure that we fix a system that was wrong, that hurt millions of Americans who had put their highest, most Americans, the greatest investment that they will ever make is in their home. And Democrats and Republicans came together and said that we want to protect them and that American dream. And we wanted to correct a problem that had arisen in the original Biggert-Waters Act, that was caused by FEMA's poor implementation and inaccurate mapping and incomplete data that led to unreasonable and unimaginable increases in premiums. FEMA did not complete what we had mandated, a mandated affordability study that was due last April. In fact, FEMA has said it will take them at least another 2 years to complete that study. FEMA did not implement provisions aimed at improving and remapping process and the accuracy of flood mapping data, such as the Technical Mapping Advisory Council. So all of these, Mr. Chairman, led to some dramatically increased premiums, which caused uncertainty, depressed home values, and hurt again the American economy. According to the National Association of Realtors, home sales are stalling in the 20,000 communities where flood insurance is required for mortgage, and families across the country experience difficulty buying, selling, or remaining in their homes. In some cases, policyholders were being asked to pay far more than their mortgages in flood insurance programs, premiums. And rate increases were reported as high as $28,000 for some primary homeowners. I can say, for example, I've seen and have had in my office individuals families who came in crying. They did everything that they were asked to do, but because of the unintended consequences of Biggert-Waters, they were put into a position where they might have had to walk away from their homes. But we came to bat, and we stepped up on March the 4th in a bipartisan manner. We came together and we said we're not going to deny these homeowners that opportunity to continue to live the American dream, and we passed the bill. And this amendment simply says that we're going to the committee will continue to monitor FEMA's implementation of H.R. 3370 and the National Flood Insurance Program to ensure the continued availability and affordability of flood insurance. So it's letting the American people know that we in Congress are doing our jobs. We're going to keep our eyes on the prize, and we're not going to allow FEMA to walk away without knowing that Congress's eyes are focused on them, and we're going to make sure that we are fair to our homeowners that live in floodplain areas, and that there we'll be able to engage and to receive affordable flood insurance. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair will recognize himself for 5 minutes. I will oppose this language. It's the first time I've ever seen the language. Much of it I could probably support, but I'm seeing it for the first time, and I'm not unhappy with the language that we already have in our views and estimates. The House has worked their will on this matter. I believe maybe the Senate has also today. I would note that much of the language that you will find in our views and estimates, frankly, were the words of our friends from the other side of the aisle. I would have them focus their attention on what they submitted in their 2013 views and estimates text. It is the language of the minority from last year's 2013 views and estimates text. Quote, "We note that the committee worked effectively in a bipartisan manner to enact comprehensive reforms to the National Flood Insurance Program." Again, verbiage from the minority. More verbiage from the minority. Quote, "We note that the act included a number of important reforms designed to make the program more actuarially sound. For example, phasing out subsidized rates, increasing premiums. We also chose language from the administration. The administration, quote, "The administration